G'day. Welcome to Crystal Clear Mathematics, where it is easier than you think. I'm Graham Henderson. You're in for a little bit of a treat today. We're following our theme of adding unusual units and using different bases in our additions, and you'll see what I mean when we start to work. The reason you're in for a bit of a treat is that I'm going to be adding some imperial measurements, and to do so I'm going to explain a little bit about their origins. So before I actually perform the addition, let's look at the units that are used in the British and the American imperial measurement system. The basic unit is the inch. This unit was used right back in the days of the Roman Empire, and essentially it was just the width of your thumb. A lot of measurements were based on parts of the human body. The palm, the span, the cubit, there are different definitions for a cubit, a yard, a foot, and so forth. But the inch was the basic one, and builders quite often would measure along a piece of timber, just using their thumb width. The foot, used throughout the Greek and the Roman empires and in many parts of the world, was obviously the length of a foot. More or less, it varied a lot, even in the same culture from time to time. It appears to have been a foot with a shoe on it, because if you put your own foot against an American foot ruler, you'll see it's not that long. But in the days of the Roman Empire, there were 12 inches to a foot, and that standard's been maintained. The word inch comes from uncia or uncia, the Latin word meaning 1/12, or at least it has that connection. So a foot is 12 inches, and appears to have always been that. The next unit of length was the yard. This appears not to have dated back to Roman days, but probably to Anglo-Saxon days, and was used predominantly in the early days for measuring cloth. I'm sure it had other uses as well, but right through the centuries it's been used for cloth measurement. I remember as a youngster seeing people measure out cloth from bolts of cloth, just stretching it out, holding a bit of cloth, stretching it out and measuring it from where their fingers grip the cloth to their nose. They'd even tilt their head a little bit to make sure the customer got a little bit more, and that was essentially the yard. So you'd buy so many yards of cloth. It's quite a simple measurement, and when it was standardised, it turned out it's about 3 feet, so it came to be 3 feet long. Very different from our metric system. So instead of 10 of these and 10 of these and so on, we have 12 and 3 already. The next measurement I'm going to write here, chain. The next one, furlong. And the next one, mile. I'm going to talk about the mile first and then come back to talk about these two. The mile also dates back to Roman days. If you lived somewhere in the Roman Empire on a main road, you would no doubt see Roman soldiers marching from place to place. There were no trains and buses and such like, so if they wanted a regiment or a cohort or a century of soldiers to get from A to B, they would march. There was no dawdling or straggling, and interestingly, not only did they march, you know, the standard left, 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 right, left, as some of you no doubt did. I certainly marched at school. The Roman soldiers marched, and there was someone always counting how many steps they took. The reason being they didn't want to waste this activity. And the number of steps, or the number of paces more precisely, that they took between towns became the standard measure of the distance between the towns. Now, you've probably heard the term pace. A lot of people today think a pace is a step, but it's not, and it never was. A step a pace is 2 steps, the sort of distance you take when you go from your left foot to your left foot again when you're marching. And the mile, back in the Roman days, comes from the term mila passum, which means 1,000 paces, or if you like, 2,000 steps. So some soldier or group of soldiers would be counting these out, and they used to put a peg in the ground about every 1,000 paces, which was a mila, or a mile. And hence we get our milestones and such like. Now, of course, this distance varied according to the terrain they were marching on and how tired they were and how much equipment they had and how well fed they were and such like. So it wasn't a fixed distance, but when it was standardised eventually, I think in around 1300, there was a great push for standardisation of measurements in England. It's undergone some revisions since then. It was basically defined as 1,760 yards. And I'll explain why. Actually, that's not entirely true. This definition dates more to the time about Queen Elizabeth I. Why did it get fixed at this? Well, we have to understand what happened with the furlong and the chain. The furlong is a measurement that comes from farming, and from Anglo-Saxon farming. It literally meant a furrow long, and it was... I'm not entirely certain that this is the case, but textbooks and historians say that it's the distance that a team of oxen would pull a plough before needing a rest. It makes a good story, and it possibly is true, but a lot of these definitions don't say how many oxen, and of course that varies with the quality of the ground and so on. But there was a distance used, particularly in England, for farming, where the oxen would plough a furrow and then turn and plough back and turn and plough again. Now, why would they want to plough a long distance? Well, the fact is that turning a team of oxen around with a plough attached is a fiddly job and time consuming, so they used to plough as far as they could before they did this. Consequently, many of the blocks of land that they farmed were long and thin, so you could plough it in just a few stretches. And interestingly, this distance was a furlong. The unit is FUR, and the width was 4 rods. A furlong, by the way, was 40 rods. A rod appears to have been the length of the ox goad. They must have fairly long ones. It was about 15 or 16 feet long, about 5 metres. And 4 rods wide and 40 rods long was the acre, and that was considered about the area that oxen could plough in a day. Now, you can understand there was a lot of variation with this as well. The base 4, by the way, was very common in Anglo-Saxon measurements. In the early 1600s, a fellow called Gunther in England decided to standardise this and make it metric. So he actually invented a chain, a physical chain made of links, and the chain was this distance. It was 4 rods, which made this distance 10 chains, because it was 40 rods long. So the acre came to be 10 chains by 1 chain, and it was very easy to measure out. Now, I actually have a Gunther's chain, and here it is. It's made of 100 links, and this was Gunther's attempt to make it a metric system. Very, very basic. this one with the handle on was the first link, then the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth and 10th, and lo and behold, there's a little tag hanging down. If we go another 10, I'll try and do this without tangling them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You might be able to see a little tag hanging down with two little, it's bifurcated at least, two little bits hanging off it. And another 10 links, and there'll be one with 3. I can see one here with 4. It's a bit hard to hold. I'll try and hold this up and you can see one with 4 here. The chain was made of 100 links, and every 10 links there was a little marker. So this became, in some ways, the first of our metric measurements. And it was designed to standardise land measurements particularly for farming and for farming land. 1 chain wide, 10 chains long. Very, very easy for someone just to stretch this out on the ground. Now, interestingly, if you're a cricketer, this is very important historically for you, because most reasonable sized townships had someone in the community who owned one of these for measuring out the land. And if people wanted to have a game of cricket, that person would go home and get their Gunter's chain, and they would stretch it out on the ground, and this was the distance between the stumps, the length of a cricket pitch. Gunter's chain. Now, when Gunter invented the chain, it was 22 yards long. If you check the length of a cricket pitch, the international cricket pitch is a 22-yard pitch. The furlong is 10 chains, so it's actually, I'll write 10 chains, and you can actually see that makes it 220 yards, which is almost exactly 200 metres. When I was a youngster, and Australia still had the metric system, we used to run 220-yard races before the 200-metre races came in. So there we are, that's a furlong. The furlong's not used much anymore except in the horse racing community. If you race horses in the United States, I think also in England, you will find that the distance horses run is measured in furlongs. I believe in Australia, I don't follow horses greatly in Australia, but I believe that the running distances were metricised back in 1972, quite a long while ago. But there you go, inches, feet, yards, chains, furlongs, miles. The abbreviations, MI for mile, FUR for furlong, CH for chain, YD for yard, FT for foot, and IN for inch. And interestingly, if you've looked at my last video, which deals with measuring angles and time and breaking them into minutes and seconds, it's interesting that we still use the double stroke and single stroke system for measuring feet and inches, for marking feet and inches. Now I'm going to erase this, and then we'll do a simple addition using these units. And the idea is that you will see, unlike our metric system where we have a base 10 each time, and unlike our Babylonian system that we've looked at, which has base 60 each time, so that you need 60 to go to the next column, here we have columns varying from 12 to 3 to 22 to 10, and sorry, the mile is 8 furlongs. So, it is quite a complicated system, and you can see why there was a great drive to revise it and replace it with a metric system, which, by the way, is what the French did after the French Revolution. They wanted to sweep out the old imperial system, anything to do with the old monarchy, and bring in a standardised new scientific U-boot base 10 system. And that's what was devised in the 1790s and early 1800s. And that's what we have today throughout most of the world. We'll talk more about the metric system in other videos, but here we'll perform the addition. I'll get rid of this, and I hope this makes perfect sense to you. We're going to add these two lengths together. I want you first of all to observe that with none of these units do we put an S on the end to indicate plurals. We don't put MIS for miles, or FURS for furlongs, or CHS for chains, or FTS or INS. Let me say it's the same with the metric system. The symbol for kilometres is km, it's not KLM, and there is never an S on the end. So KLMS is certainly wrong. If something is 11 kilometres, it's still 11 km. So that's the first thing to observe. The second thing I forgot to mention earlier is that there's another longer measure for people who are marching or walking, and that was a term called the league, which was used in medieval times for 3 miles. And that was estimated to be the distance that a person could walk in an hour, about 3 miles an hour. That was 3 statute miles. This varied around the world. The nautical league is 3 nautical miles, mostly. And I understand that the league that Jules Verne used, the French league for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, if you've seen that movie or read the book, is defined a little differently again. I think it's about 4 kilometres or something like that. But we're not going to add leagues. Let's add these. 5 and 8 would make 13 inches. Now, remember that our next unit is bundles of 12 inches. And this is certainly over 12. So we take one bundle of 12 out of this and add it in here as 1 foot. And the remainder, what's left over, is just 1 inch. That's it. 12 plus 1 makes 13. Now here we have 2, 3, 4 feet. But our next unit is based on 3 feet, making a yard. Here we have 4, so we take 3 of those and put it down as 1 yard, and all that remains is 1 foot. Moving across to the yards. 15 and 10 is 25 plus 1 is 26. So this column has 26 yards. But the next column, the chain, is based on a collection of 22 yards. We have 26 here, which is too many. We can actually take a bundle of 22 yards out of it and make 1 chain. And if we remove those 22 yards, we're left with 4 yards. Here we add the 8 and 3 and the 1, which makes 12. So we have 12 chains. Now, looking in our next column, we need 10 chains to make a furlong. So we take 10 of these to make 1 in the furlongs column, and after we've taken that 10 out, we have 2 chains left. Here we have 6 and 7 and 1 makes 14 furlongs. The mile is made up of 8 furlongs, so we take a bundle of 8 out of this to make 1 mile, and when we remove the 8, we're left with 6 furlongs. Suppose we could put a full stop. And 5 and 8 and 1 make 14, and since there aren't any other units, we're not going to go to leagues or anything like that. We just leave that as 14 miles. And that simply is how addition takes place using imperial measurements. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on this or get you to practice it, and I'm not going to perform addition, subtraction, multiplication or division with these just yet. I just want you to see how the columns behave and how we can take bundles from one column to the next. And this is exactly what we do when we're adding our decimal numbers. There it is. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you've learned something about the old imperial measurements. If you live in a country that still uses them, then this is giving you some insight. I understand, by the way, that in Myanmar or Burma, the furlong is still used on road signs as a fraction of a mile. I find it fascinating, the history of how things have been measured throughout history. We try to measure everything: lengths, areas, time, temperature, humidity. It's a fascinating study. We will pursue that in time. If you've enjoyed this video, please click on the like button, leave a comment. I would love your feedback. And if you haven't already subscribed, then please do so. Just click on the subscribe button and join the Merry Club. Thank you very much for watching.